Hello and welcome to the Volleycast. I am your host, Joe Trinzi, and on the other line, partner in crime, David Hunt. How you doing?
What's
Back
up?
on the Volleycast.
That's right. What's up, Joe? I've been busy doing nothing, so it's good.
like,
Good that you let me
but
back here.
yeah, no, love to have you on there. Few announcements here. We got a few more spots for our premium webinar this weekend. It's the nerdiest volleyball webinar out there. It's with Jeff Liu, the current technical coordinator of the USA Women's National Team, and myself, the former technical coordinator on the USA Women's National Team. And so we're really diving into stats and analytics. And most of all, it's kind of a troubleshooting, brainstorming webinar. So Jeff and I are going to outline, some of our approach to analytics, some of our framework for how we do statistics and analytics and studies. But a lot of it's troubleshooting and brainstorming for those of you who are doing off-season analytics projects, like you heard Dave talking about in episode 1. So a couple more spots for that if you're interested. Go on scoutvb.com into the shop there, and you can sign up for that, or just send me a Twitter or send me an email, and come prepared with your questions, and we'll just really dive into it. So that's Sunday at 3:00 if you're interested in signing up for that. And we finished the Tom Black webinar, our last premium webinar on Sunday. And Dave, you got a chance to take a look at that. And what were your impressions? I thought we got a lot of really good discussion on side-out offense. Really kind of went into details of what Tom is doing in each rotation and why he's doing that. And what were some of your takeaways?
Yeah, it was awesome to be able to just sit around and hear some of that dialogue that was going on. I looked down because I found myself taking notes. I was just going to listen to it while I was going to matches, and then I was taking notes. And I kept wanting to hear your input, Joe, and in some of those things. I was wondering, I wondered what Joe's thinking. But one of the things that impressed me so much was Tom knows exactly what he wants everybody doing on the court for any given play. And I think as a coach, understanding that, being able to articulate it, whether you can write it down or just clearly define it, was huge. And so it was just fun hearing him break that down and what he's doing. How many middle routes does he have? Is there 9 that I think you guys listed off?
Yeah, there probably is, when you factor in some of the different tempo, how he's got the traditional sort of 3rd or 4th step quick, but then he's also got some slower variations to get the middles involved, transition, if he doesn't have a back row attack. So
yeah,
there's a lot there. And I think you're totally right. It was interesting a few episodes ago when we talked to Ben Josephson from Trinity Western. We talked about this concept of pioneers, settlers, and town planners. And it was a blog article that we shared. And it was, for those of you who didn't hear it, basically it was talking about business, and it was using that sort of analogy. Like, you have your pioneers who are doing these innovations and going out and trying all this new stuff, and most of it doesn't work, but some of it does. And you have your town planners who are more like taking well-established concepts and then refining them for the broad market. And then you have your settlers that are kind of in between and stuff like that. And we're talking about coaches, like, hey, where do you fit in? And Tom, who I've known for a long time, coach with, he's a town planner for sure as a coach. Like, his mastery as a coach is like, he looks at what works and he can define it so specifically that it's almost like idiot proof. I really feel like Tom could take almost any collection of volleyball players and he could get them playing organized, coherent volleyball very quickly, almost faster than any coach I know, because the way that you say it, he is so specific about what each player's role is, especially on the offensive side of the ball. That doesn't mean that it has to be the same for every team. Because, for example, when I coached with Tom up at Team Canada, helping him get some things in place at the beginning of the training block, it wasn't maybe the same as when I coached with him on the USA team, because different strengths and weaknesses. But I think that's a real strength of his that I have learned from getting the chance to coach with him, is like what every player is doing and what their footwork is going to be like, especially big on footwork, is defined in every situation.
Right.
So, and then
I loved his saying that everything works sometimes, right?
Yep.
I think he had a few classic things, but I think we fall in love with that. And he was explaining that long 31 and your middle lines up and cranks it, and everything works sometimes. And I think it's, Joe, you've been great weeding some of that stuff out and being able to look at larger samples. And one of my questions for you was why, he referenced early on side out was such a big indicator, right? He kept writing it 65%. Why is it such a big indicator for winning percentage? Could you explain that to me and everyone else?
Well, there's two kind of factors to it. The first of all, that it's in some ways saying your side out percentage or your side out differential, that's sort of like saying what the score is. In another way, it's like, yeah, if we side out better than the other team, we're going to win. It's like, yeah, if we score more points, if we get 25 before them, we're going to win. So in some sense, it's kind of like that. But the rephrasing the score or the point differential into side out or side out differential, I think tells you about the level of play and also the strengths and weaknesses of your team. Like, for example, when I'm, I work with teams of all different levels. It's one of the things that I like the most. Like, I'll go from being in a national team gym, helping them or training their passers or something like that. And then 2 weeks later, I'm in a gym with like 12-year-olds. Or I'm in a gym in Egypt and we're getting a volleyball program going there with kids who've like never played before, anything like that. And I learn a lot from just seeing the contrast, seeing that whole band. And the side out, the ability to side out is just this very direct climbing factor as you go up in level of play. Like 12 and under volleyball, there's very little side out. Good server goes back. She basically goes on a run until she misses her serve. And then a few servers miss it. And then another good server comes up. And she basically goes on a run until she misses her serve. And that's the very beginning level of volleyball. And then right around 14, 15, 16, the transition between like JV volleyball and varsity volleyball in high school is when the side out team gains the advantage. So like, for example, on our GMS stats app, we can look at all the levels, all the matches we have in our database. We can see, okay, what team, what are teams siding out on average at 15s or 16s or high school teams, whatever like that. And that's about what you see, at the high school varsity level, teams on average are just a little above 50%, just a little bit above 50%. And so what that tells you is like, you can see your level of play climbing. Then obviously when you go into the NCAA, for example, NCAA women as a whole, it's like low to mid 50s as a whole. But if you look at like teams that made the tournament, it's going to be high 50s. And going up from there, if you're looking at like national team level volleyball, or if you're looking at, and then into like national team men's level volleyball, now you're talking about mid to high 60s. So it's just something where it's like, okay, if I just see the side out percentage of my team in general, that's like my level of play. And like, how do we side out in practice, for example? And even something more basic than side out percentage is like, how consistently do we get a swing inside out? So that's like a big thing. If you coach like a high school team and you just go get on the other side of the net and I just, put in a controlled regular serve.
Right.
If I put in 5 of them, are you going to get 4 swings? When I coached high school boys volleyball, one spot time, I don't know, 10 years ago by now, at least that, at the high school that I played at, after I graduated, I was coaching. And we would do 6 versus 0. So I would serve, and they would get in their 6 rotations. And the only rule was they couldn't free ball or set or tip the ball over the net. They had to jump and hit it. And it's just me. And I wouldn't even play defense. I would just serve it. And we would play very competitive games. So in the beginning of the season, at least. And they were they were like not the worst. They were okay team, actually. They actually had a really nice year. But in like the beginning of the year. So that's what I was saying to them. You can't even beat nobody.
that's the way to make them feel bulletproof, Joe. That's
that's positive coaching, right? That's what you're supposed to do. But it was like, we kind of said it and they were laughing about it. And what it is like 14 and under volleyball, you're not playing against the other team. Both teams are just playing against the net and the ball.
Right.
And then when you get to the point where both teams are siding out over 50%, in most of your matches, okay, now you've reached a level where you're kind of playing against the other team because you actually can hit the ball in the court enough to have some measure of side out. So that's why we really like to see that as a factor. And I think it's, they say defense wins championships, but it's really hard to win a championship at whatever level you're playing if you don't side out well. And I think that most coaches that I talk to that have been to Final Fours or have made championships runs or something like that, most of them say we had to get good siding out. And then like that got us in contention. And then to get over the top, okay, then we had to sharpen up the block defense. But most coaches will say our side out, just as a program, our side out got there first, and then we had to sharpen the other things out. So I think, and Tom definitely is coming from that same perspective too. So that's why side out is such a huge indicator.
And Marv told me multiple times this year that the cause of death in life is lack of oxygen to the brain. The cause of death in volleyball is lack of siding out. So just work on siding out, and then would pat me on the shoulder and walk away. So
classic Marv.
I just tend to do whatever he tells me to do. But, Joe, you kept asking Tom this idea of, do you change, and I don't know how exactly you were phrasing it, but do you change your system based on player? And just Tom seemed pretty much on if our fundamentals are good, and he has a very distinct way of how he wanted to articulate how to train each fundamental or each skill. Were you trying to get on that things should change based on personnel, or what were you trying to ask there?
In some ways when I'm doing that as sort of the moderator of the webinar, what I'm in a way is I'm trying to be a proxy for the audience and knowing what coaches tend to ask. And because a lot of times what you see is, it's always funny because I kind of connect the two sides of these. And so every single coach feels like their personnel is not good enough. I don't not good enough, but like every coach feels that way a little bit. No matter what, like when we were on the Olympic team staff, we were sometimes thinking like, oh, if we were only a little more physical at this position, or if we only had, you look and whoever, China's got this player, Italy's got this player, whoever it is. And it's like, we're coaching the friggin' U.S. Olympic team. And you still, because it's all relative. And that's what, on the flip side, when you're attending a coaching clinic, I can remember being just a club coach from Delaware attending a coaching clinic, or whoever you are. And you're seeing Tom, and he's got the Canadian national team players on the video, or he's got University of Georgia, this big SEC school. Well, my players are nowhere near that good. I'm never going to coach players that are that good. So what am I doing? And, so both the attendee, the presenter thinks his players are not good enough, and the attendee thinks their players will never be that good. So, so what it is just, it's all relative to your level. And what I think that people need to understand is like, each team is unique, but the problems that they're trying to solve are the same.
Yeah.
I think it's I can't even remember what, like literary, I think it's like Anna Karenina, where they say like, every happy marriage is the same, and every happy family is the same, and every dysfunctional family is dysfunctional in its own special way. You know what I mean?
Gotcha.
Like every successful volleyball team kind of gets to the same place. Sometimes they get there by lots of different ways. Their path is different, but they kind of get all the pieces in place. And then every struggling program is always struggling in these unique ways. And then you have to figure out these relatively simple principles of volleyball, but the problem solving and how you solve those problems is incredibly difficult. So that's kind of the message that I took from Tom when he's saying things like, well, if you're good enough fundamentally, then it's like, I don't know, do you want to run a 3 or a 1? Whatever, the pass is perfect and the setting location is good and the middle can hit it. Like, they're probably scoring either one. At that point, it doesn't matter that much. And that's being like a little, I think Tom is such a fundamentals are so critical to him. He stresses fundamentals so hard that I think sometimes he almost resists the urge to get into the weeds because he feels like it can be distracting. Like,
gotcha.
And we've been in some of these scouting meetings with USA or strategy where it's like, okay, we spend some serious time thinking about like, okay, do we attack him on the 1? Do we attack him on the 3? Which blocker do we overload? And we're running analyses on how often they leave and how often they stay, and what the blocking efficiencies are. So I think there is a lot of tactical considerations. But whenever I talk to Tom about volleyball, what I'm always reminded of is like, if you're really sound fundamentally, you have so many tactical options. And then if you're weak, if you have glaring fundamental or mechanical or physical flaws, you feel like you have to come up, you're always scheming around it, like,
Right.
and it's always, so that's what, you get, for example, like I see it all the time when I talk about defense, because a lot of times, I don't know, I guess it's just become a little bit more of my area of expertise or whatever is on the block defense side of the ball. So I'm doing defensive presentations at coaching clinics or whatever. And I can just see a lot of coaches when they feel like they have defensive players who have weaknesses. Oh, this player can't cover a tip. She can't read a tip. Okay, well, now I have to just go stand her at the 10-foot line because she doesn't have the ability to read, or she can't sprawl or pancake a ball up. So now I've had to have this tactical limitation that I have to scheme the whole rest of my team around because this player has this fundamental weakness.
Right.
And sometimes it's physical. Well, sometimes I was going to just finish. Like sometimes it's physical. Like you have that small right side blocker. Now you don't have any conversations about, well, do we stay neutral and read, or do we front, or do we do this? Your only option is, well, they have to just leave and go block the outside, and then then we have to figure out what we do with the other two hitters because this player doesn't have the physical capability to provide us with a whole range of tactical options.
Right. The phrase, you can't do tactically what you can't do technically, right? No. Just keeps coming to mind. And, from your standpoint, at what point, for most of us that have a season that's not where we only play on, Friday, Sunday, and maybe most women's volleyball is, but in men's volleyball, we have the variety, or high school volleyball, we don't have large chunks of time to train. At what point during the week, or what point during the season, in your opinion, do you not stop training, but okay, I have to acknowledge this weakness and I have to scheme a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, that's the balance that you get paid the big bucks to figure out. I think on the men's side, the advantage that you have is you have the big preseason. Women's teams don't have that. They have such a short preseason, and they're spending half of their season figuring that stuff out. Like for example, Tom was talking about, they had a different rotation one until halfway through conference, and then they changed their alignment of their rotation one because it wasn't getting it done. And whereas I think on the men's side, you got to have some of those issues. I mean, to some degree, I don't know if you ever get them totally figured out until like your first meaningful matches. Like just somehow there's always guys in preseason. Oh yeah, they could figure it out, or they're probably going to figure it out. And then, like you said, like you start getting into these matches and you're like, no, not figuring it out. Know? So I don't think there's a hard and fast rule, but I mean, to me is like at the collegiate level, I'm leery of spending match time figuring that out.
Right.
I would say.
I mean, and you guys touched on it a little bit in the beginning and a little bit at the end. What's your take on what data is valuable? What data should you get rid of? How would you tackle that?
I think it's I think with how at some levels of volleyball where they have the tools and the data, I think it's sometimes I see a lot of coaches at that level almost falling into traps of relying on the data too much.
Gotcha.
At times. So I'm talking about like teams that have all the volumetrics data, that have all this stuff. And then sometimes you can make the data say whatever you want it to say. So like, if you think that the BIC is the way to go, you're going to find the situations where I was like, oh, well, in this rotation, the BIC was 3 for 5. So if we could just get the BIC to go 3 for 5 in every rotation, we'd never lose. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
So, or whatever it is. So I think that there's a lot of room for, you don't want to have 4 different positions evolving as the season goes on. I think that's a tough ask of your offense. But I think like if you have one, But at the same time, I think you want to have like one, maybe two pieces that you feel like can come around by the end of the season. You know, so I was sort of running the training block for Team Canada in September. So they had done their Nations League or the Nations League qualifiers and done the Pan Am Games and all that. And then they had a short break. And then they came back for this month-long training block. And Tom wasn't able to be there because he was at the University of Georgia season for this particular competition. It was leading up to the North Championships. And we had like about a month of training, all things considered. So one of the biggest priorities is we were meeting and talking about, and I really wanted to find just one piece or maybe one piece and a complementary piece, for example, to our offense that we could add. So I felt like one month we could add, and one of the things, and Tom touched a little bit on a webinar, was like we wanted to be able to put more pressure with speed and more overload when the pass was back into zone 2. So we worked really hard on our middles being able to actually like follow and stay with the setter. We're doing a lot of audibles to this fixed point, dead middle of the court when the setter would go back into zone 2. But there was two issues. I mean, certainly there's value in that play, but what we felt was there was a little bit of predictability to it because we're playing teams now. Like it was going to be our third tournament playing Puerto Rico. And Mexico had already seen, so like, okay, they got a little bit of scouting, got a little experience on this. So we wanted to have that. And we had a little personnel change too, because we had an outside hitter who had gotten hurt. So we're moving our opposite over to outside. And they were playing a different player on the right side. We had a little personnel difference. And we just felt like having that middle, be able to follow the setter into zone 2, and then putting some overload pressure on the left side blockers.
Yep.
And also, then you have the big option coming down the center of the court. So when you have a middle on running dead center of the court when your setter's back in zone 2, and then you're trying to lob the bick all the way over that, you have no overload there. It's too easy to read.
Yeah.
So with those variety of factors, we felt like that was one piece we could add to our offense. So, I mean, that was the piece that we wanted to add. And then of course, everything we're trying to get better at, you know what I mean? Like better at what we're already doing. But that was the one thing where it's like, okay, we got this solid amount of training and like, the first week of training, it's not scoring at all.
Right.
But it's like, that was the one thing that we're like, okay, we're going to give it the whole training block, because we kind of feel like it's going to come around. And actually, it really only came around until our playoff match against Puerto Rico. Actually, like in the pool play, we didn't really get that going too well. And then it just kind of clicked in the playoff match. And we had a couple of nice, in the bronze medal match against Puerto Rico, which we were able to win. We got a couple of nice side outs on that and stuff like that. So that's kind of how I think. It's like, or like, for example, say I'm a juniors club coach. Maybe I'm coaching like 15s or 16s. Maybe, I mean, this would be a common scenario. Okay, I'm coaching 15s, and I got a nice middle who's never hit a slide before, and she's bad at the beginning of the year.
Yeah.
That could be something where it's like, okay, we'll spend a good chunk of the year trying to get it. And what you're looking there is like, it's not so much data so much by like keeping stats on your team, but there is a data level there where you're saying like, okay, you look at 14 and under volleyball, and even amongst very good teams, you're seeing very little slide. But if I look at 16 and under volleyball, definitely 17 and under volleyball, and I look at the good teams, they're usually pretty good on the slide. So if I'm in the middle of those teams, that's data there too. It's not necessarily like stats on my team, but I'm looking data at the general trends of the game. So in a weird way, I think sometimes coaches get too myopically focused on, I don't know, this hitter's 3 for 5 or something like that. And sometimes they lose sight of these general trends of the game. That kind of goes back to what you said at the beginning about knowing your side out and knowing this level of play. Like part of the reason I want to know my side out is because I know this general trend of level of play. Like that's like the process of mastery of my team. And I'm like, I want to know that because I want to know like how am I doing on this thing? So I think that applies to individual players too, or your offense as a whole. Like what do offenses look like at 14 and under? What do they look like at 17 and under? What do they look like on a good Division II college team? What do they look like on a decent Division I team? What do they look like on a Final Four team? Because that's another, I mean, like women's NCAA, here's one of the really interesting things about women's NCAA. If you want to go from bottom of your conference to middle of your conference, never set the back row attack, ever. Completely eliminate from your offense. If you want to go from the second round of the tournament to the Final Four, you have to be able to hit out of the back row. Every team that's in the Final Four is productive out of the back row. So I want to just know that, and I want to know where I'm at. And like Tom touched on it a little bit, and I've talked to him about that. Like he's really improved the Georgia offense, and one of the things he's done is like basically eliminate back row attack. So when they're out of system, they're throwing high balls up to the net and giving their hitters a chance to swing and all that. And it's like, okay, now you've got them in the tournament. And at some point, if you're trying to get your program to the Final Four, now you got to develop hitters that can hit out of the back row, because you're not going to beat Stanford without it. You're not going to beat Minnesota without it, et cetera, et cetera. You know,
right.
so.
And so for you, what are, some critical pieces, standards of play that I need to know as a coach to help my team perform or help get my team better on a daily basis in practice? What are the, snapshot? What do I need to know per rotation?
Yeah, I think it's a little different for levels of play, but I mean, just broadly speaking, how well do I pass? How well do I hit in system? How well do I hit out of system? I think those are the three markers. And the higher the level you are, I think the more you're caring about kill percentage, and the lower level, the more you care about error percentage.
Gotcha.
And I don't mean that in like a dismissive way, but like 14 and 15 under volleyball, if you can just consistently pass that and hit it in, that's a really good marker of your team. And sometimes you hit it in and you get kills. And sometimes you hit it in and you don't get a kill because your players aren't big and strong enough yet. Their arms, they just don't hit the ball, and you're playing a team that can dig up those balls.
Right.
Well, that's fine. Your players just need a little more time to develop their arms. So it's like a little, like your error percentage is really critical. And actually, what's really interesting is looking at NCAA beach volleyball. Like I talked to you about this before. I'm like really heavily into the beach side, because there's just so much room. There's so much opportunity. It's such a fastest growing sport on women's NCAA beach, fastest growing sport in NCAA history. And there's very relatively little data analytics, because it's hard to gather your data out there. You know what I mean? Yeah. On the beach, it's hard. It's not a sport that's been well conducive to that. So there's lots of gains for it. And one of the things that we're just seeing is like, I mean, this sounds just really stupid, but like if you cannot get aced and you can hit the ball in on your first ball out of side out, like if you can consistently do that more than 80% of the time. So if you can do it, say 5 times out of 6,
right,
you have a really good chance to win the match. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that you're just hitting the ball over easily. Of course, you're always trying to hit shots to score and all that, of course. Right. But it's like, don't get aced, hit it in. That's a surprisingly important metric. And, but then broadly speaking, like passing, in system hitting, out of system hitting. Your in system hitting is always going to be better than your out of system hitting. But like, what's the gap? Like, you'd think like at least 100 points. And as you get to higher levels of volleyball, you maybe getting closer to 200, like, your guys might be closer to 200. You might hit 450 in system and 250 out of system, something like that, or 400, 200, something like that. So like if I'm hitting 200 out of system and I'm only hitting 300 in system, then we gotta work on our in-system offense. Like what are we doing? Overloads. What are we doing in terms of isolation? Et cetera, like there. So like that's the indicator for me. Like if there's not a big enough gap between my out of system and my in system, I gotta spend tactics and timing because I'm not putting enough pressure on the blockers.
Right.
But if there's like this massive gap, if I'm hitting 400 in system and I'm hitting close to 0 out of system, and especially if I'm making a lot of errors out of system. If I'm getting blocked a lot out of system, maybe my hitters just aren't good enough.
Right.
But, if I'm hitting, making a lot of errors, then I'm just like, hey, what are we doing? So that leads into another factor is that like, as you go higher level, hitters get blocked more relative to when they hit out. So that's just like this really, like if you look in high school volleyball, on average, it's like you hit out 6 times for every 1 time you get blocked. Would be pretty typical. Like high school girls volleyball, be like 6 to 1 if we look at our stats and all the data that we have. If you look at Olympic level volleyball, men's or women's, they're getting blocked more than they hit out.
Yep.
And the NCAA, NCAA women is like, that's where you can see the crossing of that Rubicon. Like the good NCAA teams, especially when they win. Illinois, Wisconsin played a really nice match in the Elite Eight a couple of years ago when Illinois went to the Final Four, and I broke that match down for a coaching clinic one time, and it was just like both teams were really low error. Like Wisconsin made 6 errors and got blocked 14 times, and Illinois made 8 errors and got blocked 13 times, like something like that. It was just like a really good example of like both teams put pressure on the other team, and that's like with the best, with the best teams at the NCAA, like that's what they're doing. And good high school teams can get in the ballpark of that, but so I like that as an indicator, and even at the high school level. So if we lose a match and I don't know, we make 15 unforced errors, that would be pretty common in high school volleyball, and we get blocked, 12 times. I'm like, okay, you know what? Maybe that was just a pretty good team that we played, and they just had some physical or technical ability. Like, we're just not quite there yet. We just need a lot more training time in order to beat that team. But if we lose because they blocked us 4 times and we made 15 errors, that's more an indicator of us, something we could have changed. So that's, to me, that's sort of an underrated indicator. Times you hit out versus times you get blocked. So like unforced errors to forced errors.
Right. If you're trying to be a pioneer in the sport, I think it's safe to say there's no future in hitting errors. That's for sure.
No.
Don't waste your time going down that road. In the matter of time, Joe, just one last thing that you touched on, that Tom touched on, that I think has been pretty impactful for me. You touched on this expected either passing percentage, expected first ball percentage. I know that that really changed the way that how I look at stuff. Can you touch on that a little bit for people that don't know what that is and why that's so important for, side out is obviously a big number. Lots of factors go into siding out and point scoring. So why is expected first ball side out such a good number? Why do you find it important?
Yeah, so there's some somewhat complicated math or data gathering behind how that came into play, but the concept of it is really common sense. So here's just like the basic concept of this with no numbers behind it. If we pass good and side out okay, our hitters and setters didn't do well enough.
Yep.
If we pass okay and side out good, that means our hitters or setters are doing really well. And in order to side out better, we have to pass better, because like we're kind of maximizing what we're getting out of the pass.
Right.
So it's like if we're maximizing what we're getting out of the pass, we're siding out better than expected, better than I would expect based on how good we're passing. Oh, then we can only side out better by passing better. But if we're passing well enough where I'd expect us to side out a little bit better, then that means my setters and hitters are quote unquote the problem. And my passers are doing a decent job. I'm just not quite living up to expectations. And, what we can do is we can put some numbers on it. We can say, hey, in women's NCAA volleyball, when you pass perfectly, hey, we would expect to side out close to 70% of the time. And if we pass good, we expect to side out 60% of the time. And if we pass medium, 55. And if we pass a bad pass that we have to bump set and say it's 50%. Yeah, just in the ballpark there. Right. So what we could do is we could kind of take all of those numbers, and based on what we're passing, we can kind of spit out a number that would say, hey, based on the quality of our passing, we'd expect to side out 60%. And we're actually siding out at 55. So something in our offense, something from once the ball has got to the setter, is getting screwed up.
Yeah.
But say that our expected side out is only 55 and we're siding out at 60%. We're doing better than expected. Then I'm looking and I'm saying, well, my setters and hitters are doing well enough based on what they're getting. And we're really only going to be able to side out better if we pass better. So that was nice for us. There's training implications. What's the strength and weaknesses of my team? And then I think it helps a little with in-game when you're in game, because sometimes, you go down, you lose the first set and then you're down, 13-9 in the second set. It's like, okay, do we need to start subbing? Like, do we need to switch our setter? Like, what are we doing? And then so you can kind of see, like, sometimes it's just nice to have that number there to kind of say, like, and it's less about the number itself and more what it represents. Is like, are setters and hitters doing well enough based on what they're getting?
Right.
And if not, if so, then it's like, well, we got to be able to pass better. And you may not have any sub that can do that. So it's like, oh, okay, well, I don't know. Do we need to have some sort of high ball tactic? Is there anything that we can do there? But if we're passing well enough to be siding out better, then maybe that's what I'm thinking about, either changing some of my offensive tactics. Am I trying to get this overload and we need to isolate against a different blocker or whatever like that? Or is it like, is that the time when we need a sub? We need a hitter who can do something a little bit differently offensively, or is it my setter needs to make a change or something like that?
Right. No, that makes sense. That makes sense. And what? Next time, seems like we got to get Andrew back on, because you guys touch on something that can be a show in and of itself, is just the transfer from tutor to 6-on-6. And I think we all have created practice environments where it's, man, this guy or girl is, crushing it over here in this tutoring environment, and then 6-on-6, it doesn't go well. So what are some factors that play into that? From a motor learning perspective, what can we reasonably expect? How can we maximize it? And, what are we looking for out of those tutoring sessions? So
cool. That's a great topic. Let's get them on next week.
Yeah, we'll see. That shaky Wi-Fi he was experiencing last time, hopefully it's got a little bit better, but hopefully he can hop on and maybe explain some of that to us.
Cool. Yeah, let's get them on next week. And anybody who's listening here, anybody who's still listening after that lengthy explanation of expected side out, anybody, let us know. Tweet us at the Volleycast, or shoot us an email and let us know what you want to talk about. We're trying to keep a variety of different stuff going on here. And just let us know what you want to hear and what other coaches are brainstorming about.
Beautiful. Thanks, Joe.
All right. Until next time, Dave.
All right, bye. Talk to you later.
Easy.